Welcome back to OpenLine. Talking about medical malpractice. Want to hear from you if you think you have a situation that may warrant a lawsuit. Happy to have with us Clint Kelly, attorney, medical malpractice attorney. And let's go to Edwin. Hello, Edwin.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to question there. I heard, I guess, several years ago and stuff. I'm not sure the state of Tennessee, did they pass a law to where the amount for malpractice lawsuit is capped?
The amount for a medical malpractice lawsuit is capped. Is that true?
And capped in the state of Tennessee.
Okay.
Yes, Edwin, they did. They passed a cap. It's not just medical malpractice cases. It's personal injury and death cases across the board. Our legislature decided in its infinite wisdom that we were going to put a government-mandated cap rather than letting juries decide what proper damages are. And so in Tennessee, there's a $750,000 cap on all what they call non-economic damages. That's pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, loss of a spouse or a child. There is a $1 million cap for patients who have been put into a wheelchair, have sustained burns over 40% of their body, or have had a double amputation, either one hand and one leg, or both hands or both legs. The idea behind that legislation, the thinking was that the juries were out of control, couldn't be trusted to award damages, which is, to me, is absolute insult to those in our state who have good common sense, good conservative principles. And the worst thing about it to me, Ben, is if Tennessee juries can sentence people to death, why can't they decide what proper damages are in a negligence case? I mean, to me, those two things just don't fit. And anytime the government comes in and decides we know best, watch out.
Mm-hmm. So that's the cap, $1,750,000.
Right.
And this is, I'm sure, separate. But then you hear in the news that Aaron Andrews just got $55 million. So what's the difference there? How does that happen?
Aaron's case, my understanding is, it occurred in 2008. The caps were passed in 2010. They became effective in 2011. So Aaron was not bound by those caps. Constitutionally, you can't apply those caps to cases before the caps were enacted. So Aaron can collect that money, assuming that the judgment is affirmed. Now, one of the provisions of the caps is the jury is never told. So let's just say Aaron's case occurred, 2 years ago, and she got this verdict. The jury could give a $55 million verdict, thinking that that's appropriate for the pain and anguish she's gone through, people showing her naked all the time for the rest of her life. But they wouldn't know that there's a cap, and so the judge would take that award. He would reduce that amount. In her case, it could have been reduced to $750,000. That's how dramatic the cap is, and it just takes the power from the jury and gives it to the legislators. And the legislators these days are controlled by the money interest. And who are the money interests? They're the hospitals, the doctors, the insurance companies, those people who have a vested interest in making sure they don't pay too much money for the wrongs that they do.
All right, does that answer your question, Edwin?
Yes, that answered it. I appreciate that. I got a lot of information from him. I wasn't for sure. I know, like I said, I knew that the state of Tennessee was passing a law to put a cap on certain things there in a malpractice lawsuit, but he explained a lot of things to me and stuff, just not just one incident, but several different incidents there that can happen to a person there. So I appreciate it. Yeah, you have some questions.
All right, thank you. Before I go to Stan, so he actually raised an interesting question. Could you say there are multiple violations and get $1 million for each one?
No.
So really, it's just those are the caps, $1,750,000.
That's correct.
There's never going to be a time where you would get more.
That's correct. You can't exceed it. Now, your economic damages, which are lost wages and medical expenses, whatever that amount is, you can recover that. But the cap on non-economic damages is set. It's per person, per claim. And it doesn't matter whether you were hacked up 3 or 4 times in the same occurrence or same event. You're bound by that cap. It's my hope one day that one of these cases will get to the Supreme Court and that cap will be found unconstitutional. I don't believe our forefathers ever thought that you would take that decision away from the juries.
Let's go to Stan. Hello, Stan.
Yeah, listen, I was operated on in 2006. I got 5 striker bolts between my shoulders and a cadaver plate, I believe. I don't think it's a stainless steel. If it was, I'd be getting cold all the time. And they took my spleen out. I don't know what the spleen does. I didn't find that out till I went to the hospital. I'll stand by for y'all's answer.
So you're wondering if that's a medical malpractice case?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
Stan's case is way old, going back to 2006. I don't know if it was a negligent installation or there's something wrong with the hardware. Hardware would be a separate issue because that could perhaps be a product claim against the manufacturer of the striker, the manufacturer of those of the hardware. But in Tennessee, you must bring your claim within 1 year of the discovery of the injury. The only two exceptions for that would be a device or an object that's left in the body that the patient doesn't know about. The other exception is fraud, where the doctor takes affirmative efforts to hide his or her negligence, and that is extremely hard to prove.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like Stan's case, at least from a medical malpractice standpoint, would be barred.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Stan. Thank you for the call. One of the disturbing things you're seeing is the level of infections in hospitals. And what can you tell us about that? What's going on there?
All right. Consumer Reports just put out a new magazine, or new periodical. It's going to come out, I think, within the next week, where they have detailed a number of different problems with the healthcare system. But the one that they've really put their finger on is infections in the hospital. And what they've learned is pretty disturbing, which is 1 out of 3 hospitals that they surveyed across the country has an infection problem that is continuing to grow worse. And a significant proportion of those hospitals are teaching hospitals, which kind of blows me away because you'd think that would be the one place where infections would be kept to a minimum, such as Vanderbilt, where they're teaching doctors. They identified 4 key reasons. The first, and this is the one that really is amazing to me, is unwashed hands. That is the #1 way to prevent passing infections in the hospital is cleaning hands, and for some reason they just don't do it. Also, rooms that aren't cleaned thoroughly before the patient comes in. Overuse of antibiotics. You and I were talking about that during a break, where unfortunately antibiotics have been so overprescribed and patients don't take the full allotment of it that the infection grows resistant to it, and so we have these super bugs. And then, of course, lack of careful hygiene and inserting catheters, where patients will have, they'll call it a port, a lot of times.
Right.
Diabetic patients or patients who need dialysis will have ports put in their body, and those ports will have a bug on it, and the bug will circulate. They've demonstrated 1 out of 25 people that go to the hospital will come out of the hospital with a hospital infection. And that's just the number that they tested. I don't know if that number's low or high, but if you walk into a hospital, you can almost feel it teeming. I mean, you just kind of get the shakes because you feel like it's just dirty in there.
Yeah.
I don't know what the solution is, other than, like I told you, you try to stay out of the hospital as much as possible unless you're in a near-death situation. I think the outpatient clinics are in much better shape. I think they're much better maintained than the hospitals are, and most people who have surgical procedures on an outpatient basis do pretty well.
That report about infections is really, you say you don't know what to do, but that's really a wake-up call. I mean, that's an astounding number. 1 out of every 25 is getting an infection, and many of those infections can be fatal.
The worst ones that I see are MRSA, which is a methicillin-resistant staph infection, meaning that particular infection is resistant to your basic penicillin or basic antibiotics. And I've had many patients who have called me. Some have died, some have had terrible scars or injuries because they have got an infection. Knee replacement cases where they've had to have another knee replacement because the hardware was contaminated. Those cases are growing. I don't see any end in sight. And the typical case that is one that I would take are cases where that infection was misdiagnosed. It wasn't detected in a timely manner, and it gets out of control. And I had a case not too long ago with a patient who had an amputation below the knee because of an infection involved in foot surgery. That infection was misdiagnosed and mismanaged, and by the time it was discovered, it was too late to really do anything about it, and they had to cut the leg off.
Oh my goodness. Okay, let's go to Angie. Hello, Angie.
Yes.
Hi, go right ahead.
My husband had went in for a diagnosis, and they told him that he had a pinched nerve. Now they ended up doing a spinal surgery on him. Now he's in constant pain. He's got 2 screws broke in the back of his neck, and he's in constant pain. He has headaches all the time. He's at the ER all the time with headaches. We can't get, I guess, this particular doctor or any doctor to remove the screws at this point. His job has recently put him on disability, so short-term disability. So we're just wondering, is that a case?
Angie, have you gotten a second opinion from another spine surgeon?
Prior to the surgery or
After the surgery, since the time he started having these problems, have you gone and gotten a second opinion from another spine surgeon about what can be done for him?
no? We haven't had anyone. We haven't been able to find anyone to do that for us.
All right. She may have, or he may have, a medical negligence case. Now, spine cases are tricky because sometimes the hardware fails, even if the surgeon gives his best effort. I've had situations where I've had, screws have come loose, screws have actually been, have speared nerves during the procedure, and sometimes these cases are tricky. But with all that said, he needs a second opinion from another spine surgeon to determine what can be done to resolve that situation. A lot of times you'll have the second surgeon do the procedure over to fix what's going on, because it's unacceptable for someone to have to go to the hospital all the time with severe headaches from a pinched nerve.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
So, it's hard for me to tell whether that's a case of negligence, but what I counsel clients when they call me about that is you squeaky wheel gets the grease pen. You just got to get yourself a second opinion.
Right. All right, let's get Ann on the phone. Hello, Ann.
Hi. I just had a comment about the infections in hospitals.
Sure.
In the hospital's defense, there are more and more people going to visit in hospitals, and that includes small children and infants. And there are more and more people using antibacterial soaps, shampoos, dishwashing detergents, and in doing that, they are making themselves more prone to be immune to antibiotics. And by doing that, you're setting yourself up to be more susceptible to infections like MRSA and staph when you have surgeries or you're in the hospital. And so, granted, some of it falls on hospital staff, but some of it falls on the fact that you've got visitors coming in, and you've got patients, visitors, and staff that are using products that lower your immunity to the antibiotics that are there to help take care of the problem to start with. And that's all I wanted to say. Y'all have a good evening.
Well, Ann, thank you. Thank you for your call.
Let me push back on Ann just a little bit. I understand what she's saying, and it makes perfect sense. There's a couple of things, though, that have to be remembered. First of all, it's the hospital's duty to protect the patient. If you've got visitors coming in who are not clean, visitors who are coming in who may be a threat to the patient, it's the hospital's responsibility to keep that to an absolute minimum. Because what's more important, visitation or the patient walking out of that hospital infection-free? That's the first thing. The second thing is, it is proven, demonstrably proven, that there are shortcuts in the way that hospital staff are keeping themselves antiseptic. I mean, this article is one of many articles that has been published about the fact that the staff are simply not cleaning themselves or cleaning their instruments properly. I'm seeing, and I've heard about this too in other states, Ben, endoscopes being passed down people, during gastrointestinal procedures, and people getting sick because the endoscopes aren't cleaned properly. Now, that's not the visitors, that's not the children, that's the staff's responsibility. So while I'm sure what Ann says is correct, there are products that do make it more difficult to fight infections that people use. The hospital has a duty to protect its patients. That's the #1 priority.
All right, very good. We're going to take a break. Hold on the line if you're there. If you want to call in, a few lines open, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.